Hi everybody, this video is special for 500 subscribers and I want to thank you all for your likes and subscribes. ATI 3D Rage 2+DVD. This was the second generation of Rage and it was twice as fast as original Rage. It was also used in some Macintosh computers. It supported MPEG-2, that's DVD video, and Microsoft Direct 3D. ATI 3D Rage IIC AGP 8MB. 3D Rage IIC was the last version of Rage 2, and some of them already supported AGP. ATI 3D Rage Pro 4MB AGP. Its competitors were NVIDIA Riva 128 and Voodoo 1, but I think its competitor could be also Voodoo Rush, that's this one, because it was just a little bit slower than Voodoo 1. This GPU had no OpenGL support after its release, and it was added later. ATI tried to reinvent it and renamed chip to Rage Pro Turbo. They also released new drivers, Rage Pro Turbo driver set. These new drivers increased performance in benchmarks like 3D WinBench 98 and Final Reality, but there wasn't any improvement in real life and gaming. This one has memory expansion slot, so you could upgrade from 4MB to 8MB. It's awesome, isn't it? ATI Rage 128. There were two versions of Rage 128, Rage 128 GL and Rage 128 VR. GL used 128-bit memory bus, and cheaper VR used only 64-bit bus. ATI Rage 128 Pro 16MB AGP Expert 2000 Pro. This GPU was successor to original Rage 128, that's this one. Rage 128 Pro was the final revision of Rage architecture and last use of the Rage brand. Rage Fury Pro was for gamers and used 128-bit bus, and Expert 2000 Pro was for office use and used only 64-bit bus. So this one is probably Expert 2000 Pro. There was also some special Rage Fury Max with two Rage 128 Pro chips in it, but it had very bad software support. Its competitors were Voodoo 3 2000 from 3FX, Matrox G400, and Riva TNT2. That's this one, it's TNT2 M64 or TNT2 Pro. And generally it was weak against cards like Voodoo 3 3500, TNT2 Ultra or G400 Max. ATI All In Wonder 128 Pro Ultra. ATI All In Wonder cards had TV tuner, and first of them was introduced in 1996. Some 128 Pro cards, like this one, had some special Rage Theater chip for composite and S-Video TV in. You can find this chip on gaming card Rage Fury Pro, XPert 2000 Pro, and as you can see also on All In Wonder Rage 128 Pro with TV tuner. NVIDIA Riva TNT2. Entry level was Vanta M64, that's this one. Mid-range was TNT2 Pro, that's this one. And high-end was TNT2 Ultra. Right now I have only M64 and TNT2 Pro. Competitors to TNT2 were Voodoo 2 and Voodoo 3 from 3FX, and also Matrox G400, S3 Graphics Savage 4, and ATI Rage 128, that's this one. You can find TNT2 cards under name Riva TNT2, but later NVIDIA removed Riva from its name. Riva was shortcut for real-time interactive video and animation accelerator. TNT is shortcut for Twin Texel because this GPU was capable to work on 2 texels at once. Radeon 7000 AGP. Original name of this GPU was Radeon VE, but in 2001 ATI rebranded its products, so if you are looking for drivers or some specs, it's Radeon 7000 now. I have AGP and PCI version of this card. It was weak against its competitor GeForce2 MX, that's this one, but it had very dual monitor support. Unfortunately, these two have only one VGA port. Radeon R100 was the first generation of Radeon. This is RV100, its budget version of R100. Official core clock specification for this GPU is 183 MHz, but there was very large variety of core clocks, memory sizes and buses. This AGP version has core clock 155 MHz and PCI has 145 MHz. There was also some supervisor card for servers, and it had only 8 MB of memory, and it was downclocked to 143 MHz. GeForce2 MX and GeForce2 MX 200. GeForce2 MX and MX 200 were basically the same card, there was only one difference in memory bus. GeForce2 MX had 128-bit bus, and MX 200 had only 64-bit bus. Main competitor for GeForce2 MX series was Radeon VE, later renamed as Radeon 7000. And now let's see specs of both of these GPUs. GeForce2 MX 400. Basically it was the same card as GeForce2 MX, but it was overclocked from 175 to 200 MHz. Now we can see comparison of these two. It was very close to GeForce 256 with SDR memory. This card mostly had SDR memory, but there were some exceptions, and MX400 from Hercules used DDR memory. GeForce4 MX 420. It was the slowest dedicated card from GeForce 4 series. It was designed for low-end PCs and had only SDR memory. This GPU replaced GeForce2 MX and MX 200 in low-end segment. It was only slightly better than GeForce2 MX 400, that's this one. For benchmarks of this card, I had to use very old drivers, because new ones have heavy graphical issues in DirectX games in high resolutions. GeForce 4 MX 448X, GeForce 4 MX 444X, and the GeForce MX 440 SE. I have two MX 448X, two MX 444X, and one MX 440 SE, and each one of these have different specs. NVIDIA's official specs for MX 448X are 275 MHz for core clock and 500 MHz for memory with 128-bit bus. But most MX 448X were underclocked to 250 MHz for core and 400 MHz or less for memory. So first, let's take a look at these two 8X. This one is the best, with 250 MHz core, 128-bit memory bus, and 128 MB DDR memory. Not every MX 448X had 128-bit bus and 128 MB memory. This one is the best MX 448X that I have, so I'm using it for benchmarks right now. This one is slower because it has only 64-bit bus. Now let's see comparison of these two. MX 448X were always using core NV18 because it supported AGP 8X. Next are these two MX 444X. The biggest difference is that they are using only AGP4X with core NV17. Sometimes they had SDR memory, sometimes DDR memory with different speeds. Also memory bus was sometimes 64-bit and sometimes 128-bit. Now let's see comparison of these two. The last one is MX440 SE. SE probably means special edition or second edition, but it's way slower than MX448X. I don't see any real difference between MX444X and SE. They are both using NV17 core and AGP4X, and both of them can have DDR or SDR memory with different speeds. They also had 64-bit or 128-bit bus. So as you can see, there was very large variety of specs, and it always depended on sub-vendor. Now let's see GPUs and specs of all these cards. And now let's see different type of specs with real and effective memory speeds. GeForce FX 5200 is the slowest card from FX series. This card was meant as a replacement for MX 440. This one is only 64-bit and I hope I'll get 128-bit in the future. 64-bit version is slower than MX 448X in most games. Unlike MX 440, FX 5200 supports DirectX 9. It could compete with something like Radeon 9000 or 9200. GeForce FX 5500. This one is only 64-bit. If I'll get better one, I'll retest it. FX 5500 is just overclocked FX 5200, so there is nothing new. I think it could compete with something like Radeon 9250. This one. GeForce FX 5700LE. FX 5700 was mid-range. This one is from 3D Club. I really like the design of this cooler. It's underclocked version of FX 5700. LE probably means limited edition. Its competitors were probably Radeon 9600 XT or 9600 Pro. Radeon 9250. This GPU was basically Radeon 9200, but core clock was lower by 10 MHz. It was entry level. Memory was mostly 64 or 128 MB with 64 or 128-bit bus. I think its competitor was GeForce FX 5200 and maybe FX 5500 in some cases. GeForce 6200 AX. It has the same specs as ordinary 6200, that's this one, but this one has DDR2 memory instead of DDR. Also, it has 256 MB of VRAM instead of 128. GeForce 6600. I have two of them. One is AGP and one is PCI Express, but they have exactly the same specs. I hope I'll get 6600 GT in the future. This GPU was great for overclocking. Now let's see specs of both of them. Radeon X800 Pro Toxic Vival. Unfortunately, this one doesn't work. I wanted to use this GPU for CPU benchmarks, but I think I can get better AGP card in the future anyway. I think it could compete with GeForce 6600 GT. Radeon X1050. This GPU was made with 3 different cores, RV350 for AGP version and RV370 or RV410 for PCI Express. This one is RV370, so it's just like Radeon X550. It's very close to GeForce 7300 GS. Radeon X1550. It has only 64 MB of VRAM and up to 512 MB of shared memory. But this memory sharing doesn't work with newer motherboards, so I'm not testing this GPU right now. Maybe I'll get better one with bigger memory in the future. Radeon HD 4730. It's just Radeon HD 4870 with some functions disabled. It's a replacement for HD 4770, which was mostly out of stock. This GPU is very close to Radeon HD 4830, that's this one, or GeForce 9800 GT. I bought this one just because I like this picture. Radeon HD 4850. It was high-end. Main difference between HD 4850 and HD 4870 was memory type. GDDR3 for HD 4850, and GDDR5 for HD 4870, but they had same core, RV770. GeForce 7100 GS. It was the slowest dedicated card from 7000 series. Unfortunately, this one doesn't work with 64-bit OS, so I'm not testing it right now. Its competitor was Radeon X1300 CE. GeForce 7300 GT. This GPU was low-end, and what's really interesting is that if we compare it with GeForce 7300 GS, this one, we find out that it has completely different chip. 7300 GS is using G72 chip, but this one is using G73 chip. That's the same chip used by 7600 GT, that's this one. Memory bus is 128-bit for GT, and for GS version it's only 64-bit. GeForce 7600 GS and GeForce 7600 GT. The biggest difference between these two GPUs are memories. 7600 GS used only DDR2, but 7600 GT used DDR3 memories. They also had different core clock. Competitors for 7600 GS were Radeon X1600 Pro and X1600 XT, and for 7600 GT it was Radeon X1650 Pro or Radeon X1650 XT. GeForce 8800 GT. It was the first GeForce made by 65nm process, also first NVIDIA with PCI Express 2.0, but it had compatibility issues with old motherboards with PCI Express 1.0a. It was one of the most popular GPUs ever. GeForce 9500 GT. This GPU was low-end, but still it was faster than GeForce 8600 GT. Its competitor was Radeon HD 3650. It was made with GDDR2 or with GDDR3 memory. GeForce GTX 260 and GeForce GTX 260 OC. These two are basically the same, but OC has more shaders. You can find OC Edition under many different names like Black Edition or Max Core Edition. I really like these old NVIDIA cards because I think they look pretty nice. Its competitor was Radeon HD 4870 with 1GB of VRAM. GeForce GTX 275. It has exactly the same core as GTX 285, but it has different memory size and memory bus. Its competitor was Radeon HD 4890. I bought this one just because of this picture. GeForce GT 630. This one was very cheap because they told me that DVI port doesn't work, but it works just fine, and they probably didn't set up something correctly in the BIOS. There were more versions of this GPU. This one is with older Fermi architecture, and it doesn't support Vulkan. And it needs older drivers than GT630 with Kepler architecture. And of course GT630 with Kepler architecture supports Vulkan API.